Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar on how to build and scale an effective company culture. This webinar is brought to you by Culture Summit and Bunch. If you're not familiar with Bunch, it is a people insights platform that enables people leaders to effortlessly track the impact of their initiatives based on real-time data from Slack and MS Teams. It instantly measures changes in communication, collaboration, and culture, so you get the feedback you need without spending months on another employee survey. Now, for a few housekeeping items, this webinar is recorded. At the end of the presentation, we will send you a link. We'll send you an email with a link to recording. And if you have any questions during the webinar, we'd love to hear it. So please submit your questions in the Q&A panel of your screen, and we'll spend some time at the end of the presentation answering your questions. My name is Hung Pham. I'm the founder of Culture Summit, a conference that brings together culture champions from around the world to share insights and strategies on how to build and transform culture in the workplace. And I'd like to introduce you to today's presenter, Darja Gutnick, co-founder and CEO of Bunch. Prior to Bunch, Darja spent 3 years researching organizational behavior as a full-time researcher at the University of Groningen. She also consulted for BMW and other corporate clients on HR and organizational development, and has worked with Rocket Internet, N26, and other startups on developing high-performance teams. Darja, please go ahead and you can take the floor.
Cool. Thank you so much. It's a big pleasure to be here with you all today. And I'm going to guide you through a bunch of learnings we made over the past 2.5 years, being on the market now in culture diagnostics, what it started out, but now moving more and more into actually a full-blown tool that enables leaders and people leaders to get quick insights on culture, but also to take quick action. So as Hong already introduced, my name is Darja, and I'm a psychologist by training, but also an entrepreneur by heart. And super excited about the questions. There's going to be lots of insights, I think, floating your way. So please don't shy away to share any thoughts, comments, questions, and anything else in the Q&A panel. Super happily addressing it. We work with high growth companies mostly. So this can be anything between 50 employees and about 1,000 employees. And we've also worked and work with enterprise customers. So I think one of the biggest ones is BMW, but also BASF. And it's super exciting to see that topics are often similar, but also very different challenges depending on the stage of the company. And so I'm just going to go ahead and start. Typically, when we pick up the topic of culture, obviously, we don't need to do a big sell on you. However, it is important to kind of remind ourselves, why is culture actually important? Why culture? Couldn't we just care about the individual and help them succeed in the workplace? The thing with company success, though, and team success is that it really isn't only about helping the individual succeed. It's not enough to actually make each and every employee and each and every team member be great at what they do. It's also super, super key to actually understand how the glue works together. So how do you effectively work together as a team? And basically, culture is an amazing pillar that enables you to do that at all levels of the organization at the same time. So that's why culture, because it actually is that effect and that criteria or that factor in the organizational level of collaboration that enables to impact the individual, the team, the department, and then also company as a whole. So it's actually quite a neat thing, even though it's oftentimes also very challenging to build the right one for you. There's different ways how to approach culture. I think this one from Francesca is actually quite interesting because it's such a all-encompassing concept. He phrases it as culture is 1,000 things 1,000 times. And basically, it's the principles, the core values that you stand behind when you do anything in your business. So when you hire, when you write emails, when you're working on a project, when you walk down the corridor in the office, when you're like walking in the hall. So it's everything you do when you interact with people in your company. And it's not only a positive thing, because it also can be a threat, but when you do get it right, it's really a superpower, because it creates this like magic force that basically seamlessly pushes everyone in the same direction. And when you do get it wrong, so when you have toxic behaviors that start taking place and you kind of don't notice, or they go unpunished, or there is no consequences to them. Because culture is not only things that you allow, things that you do proactively, it's also things that you allow to happen. Then it actually puts the overall success of the company, of the team, pretty quickly at jeopardy. A couple of numbers for those of you that are interested in the analytical side of things. So one of our scientific partners is Charles O'Reilly, who is mentioned here on under the first number. Basically does research on how consistency of culture has, like which impact has cultural consistency on actual performance. I'm so sorry, I have my cat freaking out in the background. So in case you hear any noises, that's that. Basically, Riley and his colleagues are looking at what about culture actually makes companies perform. And he has found that it's not really any of the specific aspects of culture. So it's not about having a one kind of particular culture that really, really works for a tech company, for instance. It's really more about cohesion and the cultural core. So it's about alignment on what things are important and what matters. So he has found that companies that have stronger cohesion around cultural values and core values actually are 5 times more productive in terms of revenue. So they actually generate much more output. And I really recommend looking at that paper if you're interested, that is cited right here, Chapman, Caldwell, Riley, and Durr. We also see in the job market, so culture is not only about internal performance, but it's also about how you appear in the marketplace. So obviously Glassdoor, but also other players are publishing reports over and over again where there is actual footprint of good culture paying off. So more than 90% of job seekers are actually more likely to apply at companies that are effectively and actively managing culture, speaking about it, and where there's real traces of the management and the whole company caring about culture, creating artifacts around it. And third, and last but not least, oftentimes a big topic nowadays where there's a lot of competition in the market around talent. Once you have won the right talent, you want to keep it. And so nothing retains talent better than actual shared sense of purpose and basically a strong cultural core. So people don't necessarily stay because of specific features you build or because of specific value to deliver to customers, although, or albeit that's very important, they typically stay because of the relationship, the strength of the relationships that they created. So what is company culture in the end, from a nerd and a scientific point of view, not only from Brian's point of view? Culture has oftentimes referred to or being referred to as this kind of like magical black box that you can't really dictate, but you can influence it. And so the question becomes, how can you influence it? And there is literally 7 aspects of culture. And I've borrowed this slide from a Netflix slide deck that probably most of you are familiar with. If not, you can look it up. I think there is a collection on Product Hunt, actually, on 200 culture decks of the most known companies and the most successful companies in the world. That's, I think, an older iteration of that current culture deck. So the aspects of culture are not only values, even though that's the first thing we think about, but it's also how we perform. It's also how people take responsibility. And even though it's the pillar that allows you to influence almost every level of the organization, it's very contextual. So it's the opposite of push in that sense. So it's not control, but it's actually pull. It's creating dynamics that help people orient themselves and kind of behave the way they need to behave in order for the whole organization to be successful without anyone really telling them, kind of by them knowing automatically. It's highly aligned and loosely coupled, so it's really not about written contracts, but it's a lot about actually verbal agreement. And it's also about what you pay and kind of what you reward and how you promote people. The one thing that I think a lot of leaders really understand just quite into their leadership journey is that culture is much less about the actual abstract ideas, core values that we like to refer to when we talk about culture. You can have a very strong culture without having the values written out anywhere, But if you go into the team and you ask them what behaviors are accepted and kind of necessary to be successful, if you then get the same answer from everyone, you don't actually need to have big value statements on the wall. What really matters is the understanding of behaviors that are really, really useful in your context. So if you get your team and your organization to really understand what's the do's and don'ts of being part of your crew, then that is what makes you effective at building culture, not necessarily the artifacts that we always kind of keep in mind. And as I mentioned, Charles O'Reilly, one of our partners, has done really wonderful research that I really recommend digging into. On the Stanford Business School blog, I think there's a lot of research published. This is one paper that was particularly focused on culture that drives growth. And that is when he is going into his 6-dimensional model, which I'm going to share with you in a couple of seconds, and basically pointing out that it's really not important which values you focus on. So you can be a hyper-transparent company and can be super successful at it. You can also be a very secretive and very kind of introspective company and choosing not to share much. And you can also be very successful with it and have a strong culture. So it's really not about the quality and the taste of it. It's more about the consistency with which you actually create it. And what he refers to as culture, I personally find very interesting. Again, you probably have 15 different definitions of company culture if you Google for it. At Shines, I think, is the most famous one. I wanted to give you an alternative or two. We already saw Brian's, and Charles O'Reilly basically calls company culture a system of social control without actually having to dictate which things are right and wrong to do. If you build a great company culture, it helps your team and your team members actually have a really strong guidance and strong orientation. It's kind of like the rules of the traffic system for organizations. So it's this collection of norms, of do's and don'ts, of things that everyone needs to know in order to operate effectively and collaborate effectively together. So I think in the beginning you heard a little bit about what our company does, and data plays a big role in it. Culture and data didn't go together for quite a long time. I think when we talked about culture, it was all about actually spending the time to build relationships and being very much one-on-one. And it's not by mistake that this webinar is about scaling effective culture, because when you actually look into how can you scale functioning relationships when companies grow very quickly and everything seems to get out of hand, then data plays a very, very big role. And I want to walk you through how that is and why that is. So I've already mentioned we worked with one particular model that Charles O'Reilly and his colleagues developed. So in his system or his mental model, and I think this is the thing, if you don't take one thing away from this webinar, or if you take one thing away from this webinar, then that should be it. In this mental model, he basically identified 6 dimensions that play a role for any culture in when it comes to company culture. So if you go into any company, you can measure these 6 dimensions. However, how strong each of these dimensions is, so basically the intensity of each of these dimensions really, really gives a different flavor to the company culture. So, and I will explain in a couple of minutes how and why that is. Just wanted to walk you through them pretty quickly. So for those of you out there who are listening and that have a psychological background or social sciences background, you'll probably relate to the term norms. So when we talk about culture, we deal a lot with norms, because norms is basically this level between behaviors and values. So if values and principles are inside of our belief systems and in our heads, and we don't always think about them, then, and behavior is that what we do every day, then what helps us to kind of like keep both of these things connected and together is basically norms. So these are norm dimensions. And basically when Charles O'Reilly works with culture and measures culture in companies, he goes into companies and into teams and actually measures how adaptable is a team, how principled are they, how customer oriented, how collaborative, how meticulous, and how results oriented. And I just want to spend a couple more seconds, a minute or so, on what these dimensions mean, because they're actually really important. Adaptability basically is all about risk taking, speed, learning behavior. So it's just trying things out. So when you have teams and companies that are highly adaptable, so that really prioritize adaptability as one of their core norms. They show a lot of opportunistic behavior, so they're quicker on adjusting timelines, they're actually jumping on opportunities very readily, and so on and so on. When you look at very principled companies, so companies that are all about systems, rules, and principles, and kind of like holding ethical principles and standards very dear, then you will hear a lot of beliefs around we want to do the right thing. So when you maybe think about companies that are in the environmental space or in general have a very purpose-driven mission, then you find a lot of principles and principle orientation. So companies that are very principled have typically very clear guidelines and belief systems that can't be compromised no matter what the opportunity is. So saying no to opportunities is a typical behavior in a principled culture. Customer orientation, and some of you might know examples like Amazon or other companies that are really all about customer orientation. And these companies are really just focusing the majority of their time, or their management and leadership is focusing the majority of the time trying to understand how to predict the needs of customers and how to serve them better and better. And so it's part and core of the DNA. Collaborative is probably the majority of teams out there and of companies actually. So collaboration is literally team orientation. You find a lot of mindsets and beliefs of people that are very humble, that basically know they can't do it alone. They really need other people to succeed. And so the focus of collaborative cultures really lies on trying to understand collaboration. If you look at teams, specifically junior teams are also relying on collaborative behaviors often. Meticulous basically means detail-oriented, or how diligent you are. So companies and teams that are in industries and markets that really require precision, being analytical, being attentive to detail, live in that area. And results orientation is basically all about achievement. So companies and teams that are really into driving results, a lot of times sales-driven organizations and so on, oftentimes have a lot of behaviors around just making things happen and make sure that things get delivered on time and so on. So these are different dimensions. And the idea basically is every team and every department, every company has a different score in each of these dimensions. And the combination of these scores basically gives the flavor to that culture. And as you already have noticed, we came from data. Basically, O'Reilly assumes, or shows in his research as well, that strong cultures have one thing in common. On these 6 dimensions, they have a few that are strongly held and widely shared. What that means is that those cultures that actually have 1 or 2 very strong peaks, so where if you ask people in the organization what's the most important to them, what's the priority, and they all answer with the same kind of set of behaviors, you will have these very clear, strong dimensions that really stick out. And O'Reilly has found that if you have companies, teams, and departments that have this strong profile of 1 or 2 key dimensions, they simply perform better. And it really also makes sense in a way, because on these aspects, they don't need to align every single time. So they don't spend so much time in actually debating how they make decisions, for instance, which doesn't mean that they don't have different opinions or conflicts. Very often happens. And conflicts in each of those cultures also looks very different. But the key is that it's not so important to have a huge variety of principles, but in terms of culture, you actually need to have alignment. And just to give you a little bit more like down-to-earth examples, because I'm aware this is quite scientific and quite nerdy content, just to help you digest a little bit. So if we look at these 6 dimensions, we've used our natural language processing technology to go through actually Glassdoor reviews of companies and kind of sort them into buckets. So when you see a logo in each of these quadrants, or in each of these boxes, then that's due to the fact that we've analyzed the Glassdoor reviews of these companies, and we've basically identified that this was the dominant dimension that we have found people speak about when they actually report their experiences with these companies. So as you can see, adaptability is pretty much Facebook's kind of dominant dimension. So when you remember maybe move fast and break things. I think Mark Zuckerberg was also very leading with that kind of mindset. So don't care about the consequences, try many things out. And that's exactly what an adaptable culture does. So it's very willing to experiment, it's open and fast-paced, quick to take opportunities. It also suffers from high adaptability levels, obviously. So each of those have actually negative effects. The negative effect of adaptability is lack of consistency and unpredictability and chaos. So if you want to maximize for the upsides of adaptability of an adaptable culture, which many unicorns do, then you have to be ready to pay the price on the negative side. So you have to be ready to have a culture that is also messy. I want to take out another example, which is, I think, results orientation. So in result-oriented companies where we have found LinkedIn and Netflix, for instance, lives, you see a lot of achievement focus, a lot of orientation for like athletic performance, high expectations, and so on. And that's great. There's nothing wrong with that. There's a lot of people that actually have these norms, have been successful with these norms. And it does not mean that this is a bad culture. It only becomes toxic if you are not honest about the expectations around the downsides of it. So if you're joining a very performance-oriented culture, you have to be aware that this will bring some competitive pressure. It will have tense working atmosphere, and it will be impatient and somewhat aggressive at times as well. So you just have to be either ready to live with that or help to shift the culture into a different territory, which can be, as we probably all know, cumbersome exercise. So every team, every company, and every part of a larger organization have their own cultural profiles, and knowing them really helps you to, on the one hand, if you are in any role that impacts culture design and culture management, to make the right choices on the next targets to set. But if you're on the side of a team member or an employee, it really helps you navigate the context, because changing a whole culture is oftentimes not a single person job. However, you do contribute to it, of course, and just being aware of what the dominating principles and norms are is really helpful to understand which ones do you want to keep and agree with, and which ones maybe do you want to lift to awareness and actually discuss. Thank you for the question. I'm going to address it at the end of the webinar. So I just mentioned that we use a natural language processing to actually understand. So here's just a quick illustration of how that really works. So there is obviously keywords. For those of you that are familiar with machine learning approaches, we start with a parser or dictionary approach where we have collection of keywords for each of the dimensions that we basically identify, but it goes beyond that. Obviously, we also use contextual recognition. So emojis, for instance, in communication play a big role. So it's not only about keywords, but also about combinations of keywords and emojis, and then also about specific grammatical structures that we use as features. And to kind of prove you that there's not one great culture, but there's actually many, I actually included an example of an ebook that I'm happy also to reshare to you guys after the webinar that we produced, where we looked at kind of the tech giants, Glassdoor reviews, and try to understand what their cultural profiles are. And so I've depicted 3: Netflix, Amazon, and Google. And from what you can see, albeit a bit small, happy to walk you through it, is that Netflix, for instance, here has 2 clear kind of dominant dimensions. And so you've seen Netflix as an example for results orientation in a previous study. I think that was the first one that we did about 2 years ago. So results orientation came out stronger. This one is from this year. And with the newer Glassdoor reviews, we've seen that their customer orientation has increased a lot. So basically, there are 2 major dimensions: are results orientation, customer orientation. So when you read reviews, you see people either complaining about too much customer orientation or being very happy about it, how important the users are and the user base. Or on the other hand, how important it is to actually deliver results, or otherwise you can't really make it at Netflix. Amazon is actually similar, but also has quite a lower degree currently on customer orientation. So it also changed a bit between the 2 studies that we did, but also quite a high level of adaptability, and actually quite a high level of detail orientation in comparison to Netflix. So, and it also makes sense. I mean, it's an e-commerce giant, right? So I wouldn't be surprised if going into the details on each and every conversion rate isn't actually really important. So it also makes a lot of sense to have cluster around that. And what we see in Google's case, it's really, really interesting. As you can see, collaboration for Google is much more important than for Netflix and Amazon. And that also makes sense because of the complexity of Google's product suite. So the engineering culture behind Google always has been. It's not a product company, it's really an engineering company. And the complexity of the product suite that they have by now really requires really great collaboration between engineers, because if they don't figure it out, the complexity is unmanageable. So they drive a lot of the cultural and the company direction through actually working collaboration between engineering teams. And for those of you that might be familiar with Project Aristotle, that has been published around 2005, where psychological safety came out as one of the predictors of team effectiveness, that was kind of the renaissance of that construct, really, is because they understood if we have silos or if our engineering teams don't collaborate effectively, we really don't get anywhere. So they started spending money on science around teams very, very early. And it is because it is that driving force behind how their business operates. So what you can take away from here is, first of all, there's not one great culture, there's different, but also it's really part of the strategy to design and nurture those behaviors that are related to the dimensions that really matter for your business. To be clear, and when you talk about culture and psychology and all these fluffy stuff, it's easy to mix a lot of things up, but they are actually different. So we're not talking about skills and we're not talking about personality. Personality is something that is very stable over time. Some of you might be familiar with the big five dimensions. So it's whether I get energy out of being with people, extrovert, or I need my quiet time, introvert, or it's about being emotionally stable or neurotic and things like that. This has nothing to do with my norms, what I think is good when I'm at work, or what I think helps me to be successful when I'm at work. And it's also not skills. So if somebody that you interview as a job applicant, or if you use one of our products, for instance, we have an assessment product that actually helps you measure these 6 dimensions. You can find it on our website as well. If you basically check candidates for their current norm mindset, and somebody tells you that they really value customers and their spider graph is really, really high on customer retention, that does not mean that this person has the best skills to deal with customers. However, it can indicate that they have a largely rooted interest in customer orientation. And so they might be more motivated in learning it. So it's not exactly the same as skill, but there's obviously a correlation between how skilled someone is and how important they see this being in the workplace. So I don't want to keep you long from the actual how. So if there's not one great culture, then what can you do for your team, for your organization? And there's 3 easy steps, even though not so easy to execute. 3 simple steps, let's say. It starts with data. So it actually starts with see and measure your current culture. It's really important that you don't rely on a few reports of some people. And I think in the age of diversity and inclusion, it's really important to keep that aspect in mind as well. Whenever you judge culture by your water cooler conversation or your chats or your one-on-one reports, you basically leave out many, many voices out of the picture. So it's always better to systematically assess culture one way or another. And there's more and more tools coming out, and we provide one of them. However, I'm really sure there is a kind of bigger industry segments of people analytics that will be focusing on culture analytics much more and more. You also need to make the choice of where you want to go. So do you want to move fast, break things, Facebook? Do you want to be a Netflix who's super athletic and customer oriented and results oriented? Or do you want to be, or are you building a very collaborative business? And it's not only about what you want it to be, it's also very much about what is needed for your business. What do your customers expect? And the last but not least, take initiatives. On the one side, you can check for mindsets of people. So how do you actually help your team to get there with strategic hiring? And strategic hiring, not only on hard skills, but actually on what additional perspectives, mindsets, norms do new candidates bring to the table. So if you want to make your team more adaptable and you are ready to bite the pill or to kind of grind through that time when things will be uncomfortable, it's really good potentially to get a hire on board that has very high adaptability. and will be colliding with the rest of the team, but will help your team to actually change the cultural profile over time. So just to give you kind of like 2, 3 more details on how something like this can work. So in our case, we provide a platform that actually reads cultural signals from Slack. So basically, when you onboard, and all of you are, of course, invited to try it out. It's currently in a free beta. So the technology and the product are changing quite fast and quickly since we're still in a beta phase. But when you go on Bunch.ai, you'll be able to sign up, and we will be providing you the ability to decide: are you focusing on optimizing culture? Are you focusing on making your team more productive? Are you focusing on increasing engagement? And the neat thing about being living in an age where we actually collaborate online is that in previous times, we always used to wait on surveys, right? So when we want to measure something that is even slightly psychometric somehow, typically we work with surveys, and there's been a lot of great tools in the past years, like Culture Amp and others, that have provided a lot of technology to enable that process. We just basically entered a new age where we actually can deal with digital exhaust data, so data that we produce by mistake, basically, just as as a residual of our collaboration every day with our teams. And tools like Bunch can pick that up and turn this into actually meaningful insights. So right now you see a screenshot of our product actually as it is today. We actually took it today. And it gives you insights into how your psychological safety in your current team based on your communication patterns on Slack is evolving. So it's really a breakthrough in ability to measure culture right away. So you used to wait for huge turnaround times, and you don't need to do that anymore. You can actually just plug in a tool and actually see the first indications. And obviously, we don't leave you with that. We also give you recommendations that are tailored based on your diagnostics, so where you currently stand. We give you team rituals that have been tried by other companies, so you don't see it in the screenshot, but we also always provide kind of logos of companies that have experience with this particular ritual. So this is actually an anxiety party that is recommended to improve psychological safety in teams, and this one is actually from Slack. So they've tried that. There is a blog article on it that is linked to this team ritual, and you can try it out yourself. So last but not least, the big decision to make, obviously, what kind of culture you currently have. You can actually use Bunch or other tools to measure that, but what kind of culture is actually right for your team and your organization. So once again, jumping back into the kind of 6-dimensional model, you basically need to pick which kind of dimensions, which behaviors do you need the most to succeed. So the way I would really look at this is looking at the pluses and the minuses and really ask myself, ooh, I like the pluses, so I really like to be opportunistic. I really like to take advantage of opportunities. That all sounds great and being very innovative, but can I really also live with the chaos and the lack of consistency? And am I ready to take precautions on that as well? And there is actually a quite simple approach to kind of like how to walk your mental process through this. So always start with your strategy. And I know it's a big word, and being a former strategy consultant, I always wonder still what that is. But basically, the question underneath is the key. Why should a customer pick your company? If you know the answer to that, if you know why people are buying from you, that's like half of the rent, as you say in German. So like that's the most important thing to know. If you know this, the rest that you need to just do mentally is basically say, all right, if for instance, I am a Swiss watch producer and I really need to provide the best quality ever because people expect me to provide the best quality watches in the world. That's why customers buy me. Then I just simply need to ask myself whether what is needed to actually, which kind of behaviors does my team or do my teammates need to display in order to achieve that? So obviously, if you provide high quality products, you do need to have diligence in your team. You need to have very good QA processes. You need to have very attentive people. It really needs to matter to them what quality you produce. So the key success factors here are all around diligence and detail orientation. Then, in comparison to this, you can then use tools to actually diagnose where do you currently stand. So if you are setting out on a new journey, new startup, new project, whatever, and you understood that the value that you're delivering to customers is all about quality, but everyone you have on the team is thinking it's all about adaptability, then you will head into a huge issue, because basically the market will expect you to be diligent, detail oriented, and super perfectionist about everything. But what you'll deliver is tons of iterations that are half perfect. So that's not going to work. So you will need to basically merge these gaps. So you identify the gaps and you design initiatives for change. So first, the easiest step obviously is to look into having an open conversation about these targets. So your team knowing about what they're supposed to be optimizing for oftentimes does a lot of the trick that is actually needed. And of course, hiring plays another big role. And last but not least, I just wanted to share quite a personal case study with you before I then turn over to the questions. We actually had a cultural challenge ourselves in the past, and we have a lot of data scientists, psychologists, and engineers on board. So we're quite a techie team, as you can imagine, but also a startup. So we've had to iterate and pivot quite a bit with our product aspects and features and so on. So we had to keep speed and be very adaptable, while the majority of the team was actually really detail-oriented, principled, and collaborative. And so we had a feeling as founders particular that we actually need more customer focus, and it's just really, really hard to find. And so the way we felt this was we had slower progress on delivery on product features. Obviously, not all of our customers were also happy with the features. Oftentimes, we debated for hours and kind of derailed the conversations and discussed buttons. And maybe some of you can relate to that. We had some conflicts and friction, definitely, and we had low buy-in into the actual overall product roadmap. And so we understood quite quickly this is probably a customer problem, because we started also applying our own by then produced products and kind of seeing the variety of beliefs that we had in the team. So we didn't have one unified set of priorities culturally that people could relate on. So when we actually connected our Slack account, we also saw that we have a lot of collaboration and not a lot of customer orientation. So our highest dimension was collaboration, but actually customer orientation, which in our founder eyes mattered a lot, actually was really, really low. And principles was also quite high. So basically our target profile would have looked something like results orientation, adaptable, and a little bit collaborative, and then very high customer oriented. And we clearly had gaps there. So what we did basically is to eat our own dog food, obviously. And you'll see when you actually interact with the culture hacks on the platform, you'll see that some of them actually have our logo on it, because we kind of developed them on the fly because we needed to. So the customer chair is an Amazon hack, but Team Customer Hour is something that we still have and keep, and it's really important. It's basically a weekly get-together where it's an all-company meeting, and we literally share the learnings on all customer interactions, from sales, marketing, but also from product that we have found, and produce and share artifacts. We also have a round-robin customer care concept, which actually a lot of big tech companies also share. So I think Pinterest, at least at a time, did, and Stripe did as well, where they kept engineers very close to customers. So you never got to be only some sort of development engineer. You also literally needed to spend time with your customers. So you basically take turns on either doing customer communication or implementation or support of some kind. Yes, this is an example. And you can find all of those culture hacks actually in our assessment product on also Bunch.ai, but there's also a new collection of hacks in the analytics product. And we chose different initiatives that we tested, and we actually did achieve quite a good impact over a course of months. So, and you can see it doesn't take a week, so it's obviously continuous efforts, but we definitely saw a very good steady improvement on customer focus, and we actually get compliments on how specifically customer focused our engineers often are when they actually do intercom duty and things like this. Yeah, I can only say it really is worth it. It's often very hard to prioritize, of course, but when you actually feel the pain like we did back then, it really solves a lot of issues to actually kind of not guesstimate and not kind of bank on some voodoo magic things around culture, but it actually is quite analytical, predictable, and manageable process and construct. I hope that was the takeaway that you got from this exercise. So last but not least, just to wrap things up, and help you kind of to remember the takeaways. Number one, you definitely can't be everything. You need to prioritize. So make a decision on which dimension really matters for you. Number two, it's a constantly changing thing, so it requires continuous effort. So it will never be enough to introduce one thing and then not do anything for a year. But look out for quick wins. So to give you another example, when morale is low, for instance, our highest performing quick win ritual that we recommend is spontaneous applause. So when you are actually in the office or when you are working distributedly, somebody did something really great, and one person just starts a spontaneous applause, and everyone else needs to join, and people need to guess what it is for. So it's actually a very funny one. Catches like fire, works on almost every team. It's really great. You can measure it. Dot. And it is key to succeeding in the market because people do buy into the idea behind what you're selling, and they see people interact, and they see how your people show up outside and inside of work, and it is the reason why people buy services and products from you, but also why people join your company. So it's kind of the duty of every leader and every team member to keep that part of the business and the organization actually up to date. And using rituals, so we call them culture hacks, will really help you to prioritize specific behaviors. So it's never something you can achieve right away, but it's definitely something that you can help nudge and improve over time. And it's actually quite straightforward to do. And that's basically it. And I'm super happy to jump on the questions. Hang, is that all right with you when I'm going over to the questions?
Yeah, yeah, I can go ahead and read them for you since I have them here.
All right, cool. Let's do that.
Okay, so first question. In a time of massive organizational change, which is oftentimes highly damaging to company culture, how do you convince stakeholders and burnt out employees that culture should remain a focus, especially if job loss is a possibility?
I really think that's a very good question. It's not an easy one. I think that this will always be a topic, I think, for every group of people that is going for change. So number one, I think normalize it. Prepare everyone that this is going to happen. Actually, I think the most funny part is that we as managers are always so surprised when people are unhappy, when there is insecurity and ambiguity in the business. Obviously, they're unhappy. Change is just really hard for everyone, even for people that like change. So I think preparing people that things are going to get rough for a while, and making sure that psychological safety is prioritized. So making sure that people can voice concerns and anxieties constantly helps them to actually work through it. At the same time, I think getting buy-in on the culture design process. So as I just walked you through, I think having the conversation with stakeholders around, in this process, what is important to us. Oftentimes, it's already enough to just tell people, we will not be able to prioritize collaboration at that time because this will probably kill our business. We need to bite through and we just need to deliver results. Or we need to innovate. So we need to actually focus on adaptability. So it will not be possible to be the most collaborative team in the world. So them knowing what flavor are they buying into and making an aware decision whether they want to stay on board for that or not. So if they don't want to, I think it's actually better to have a mature conversation around this by offering very clear options and say, is this something for you or not? That way you also create a very strong core of those people that actually made a aware choice of wanting to have a particular, being part of a particular experience and a particular culture. So I agree with the fact that we're all responsible for culture. I also feel oftentimes, specifically leaders, I think, are very harsh and kind of like blaming on themselves, and therefore don't take responsibility because they feel really bad when in change things go wrongly. They feel guilty about not being able to do anything about it and so on. And they're afraid of opening up the conversation of, things are shitty, let's fix it together. From a business perspective, we will definitely need X. And if you can't sign up for X, I totally understand. But we kind of need to like get commitment on that goal culturally as well, because that's what we will need to have in terms of behaviors moving forward. So I think having that aware and open conversation and strategic and analytical conversation about it is oftentimes very helpful to get clarity on people's minds.
Okay, thank you. Next question. In a time of near massive growth, but intentional and oftentimes slow hiring, how can you help keep culture and engagement in in top of mind when burnout is real and people are stretched thin. Obviously, hiring will help, but there is still an onboarding process until the extra weight can be taken off employees.
Yes, that's a very, very a good one, even though similar, I think very different. In this, people for the chaos. So if you actually are aware, oftentimes these companies that have high growth have very adaptable cultures. So behaviors like hello, hello. Sorry for the connection. Not sure what happened. Can you hear me back?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, so basically, I think being open about the fact that this is how we did it, and they're really concerned about how to orient themselves and things like that. I think it would be really helpful for them to actually understand, why are things this way? Why do we prioritize for speed and high growth? And why do we need to scale very quickly and can't really make time to actually get rid of all the debt? It's by design, and it actually helps us to be successful. So I think in onboarding, not only focusing on the actual logistical and tactical parts, which are also very important, but also give meaning to the chaos, because it is by design oftentimes, and it's a good thing. So kind of seeing the opportunities in the culture. So in the end, it kind of is the same thing. So it's not so much about judging it. It's like saying, oh, it's a bad culture. No, it's not a bad culture. It is what it is, and you can make it better every day by optimizing behaviors. But in the end, the very important first thing is to, as a new hire, as a newcomer, to accept things for what they are, and then start to build on top of them and actually kind of change them. So I think giving employees this perspective that they first can change it, but only through acceptance, I think is really powerful, because it gives them resources and control back. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thanks, Daria. So next question, do you know of any examples of a large and well-established company using people analytics and culture hacks to demonstrably change their culture?
That's a very good question. So I don't want to reveal too much about our customers, because we obviously have confidentiality agreements in place, and culture is also oftentimes a very sensitive topic, specifically when it undergoes a change. I think there's a lot of sensitivity, so I don't want to go into too much kind of like case studies in that detail. We can reveal names of customers, but in that detail on that side. But I can definitely give examples from, I think, more publicly known companies from the people analytics community that I think are great examples. So I think one of the examples that comes to mind is definitely IBM, I think, when they actually went through the major change that they've undergone, I think, for the past 10 years or so, kind of moving away from being a tech company to like more service-driven company. I think customer focus was a really, really big deal for them. And for those of you that know the book, Make the Elephant Dance or so, I think it's called, there's a lot of culture hacks in there that are described around increasing customer focus. Similar thing, I think the person for like culture hacks is definitely Jeff Bezos on Amazon. I think his challenge always is to keep everyone streamlined and kind of like consistent across the thousands of employees of Amazon, or thousands of different lines of work as well, from developers and marketeers, online people, to actually logistical teams and centers. He oftentimes uses very particular behavioral design elements. So the fact that I think PowerPoints are not welcome, but you actually need to write everything in a one pager. The customer chair hack is definitely from him, where teams, when making decisions, need to keep one customer symbolically, one chair symbolically for the customer. I can't really occupy everyone around the table and things like that. So there is definitely, I think the bigger the company gets, the more important those hacks get, because you can't really figure it out across the table anymore, if that makes sense.
All right. Is Slack the only communication tool you can analyze?
Also a very good question. We currently offer Slack and Microsoft Teams, even though we are much more focused on Slack, but you can also use it with Microsoft Teams. And we definitely also have prototyped calendar data, because it actually adds meaning and understanding and contextual awareness to our insights. And we've also experimented with some other tools in the past, like Jira, for instance, and Trello. So people analytics and kind of analysis of digital exhaust data is a wonderful sandbox that you can experiment loads with. But we have found that providing meaningful insights is really much, much easier to do from communication data on Slack than it is from, let's say, only GitHub or only Trello, only Jira. So in the future, we'll be adding more tools, but currently we're focusing on being a Slack first product.
Okay, thanks, Daria. How important and helpful is managing culture in smaller people organizations, for example, less than 10 people? At what stage should you start aligning the organization to a codified culture?
Interesting. So I think you probably have a good feeling for when that's necessary. So I think 10 is probably, if you do invest in actually surfacing and creating artifacts around culture, then I think you're doing it preemptively so that problems don't arise later. And then it again depends on what type of person and founder you are, but at the same time also what's important in your business. So if your business is really requiring stability and kind of needs detail, orientation, and diligence, and so on. So you might want to also kind of like plan ahead, and then it makes more sense to invest in it. I think oftentimes companies start really thinking deliberately about it when they actually have growth pains. I wouldn't wait too long. I think somewhere around like 25 people or so, it's going to be hard to align everyone without solid artifacts. And in general, the principle of doubling the size of the company holds very true on culture. So if you go from 10 to 20 very quickly, you definitely will feel it. And there's going to be confusion and fears and anxieties, and people won't express it, and they will talk behind back sometimes and things like that. So in order to kind of like not let that toxic, like the first toxic behaviors take over, it actually course correct. I think these are the points in time when you actually sit everyone down and find good frameworks and tools that you can start with and kind of involving everyone. I think very important is also to have a common conversation about this. So like not just create some values and then like swamp them on everyone, but actually open up the forum and say like, for us as a management team or as a founder team or whatever, it's like these things are important because we are in this business and our customers pay us to do so. That's why we need these behaviors. So adaptability is very important because this is what the market expects from us. So now, dear team and everyone together, how can we deliver this better together, and how can we make our lives easier? And then basically collecting rituals from the team as well that they might need is, I think, a very good exercise to start that conversation.
All right, thanks, Daria. I think we have one last one. Was the book you mentioned called Making the Elephant Dance or Making the Elephant Fly? An attendee saw 2 books on Amazon. I wanted to clarify.
It's the dance one.
Okay, Making the Elephant Dance. All right, so if there are no more questions, we're going to wrap up today's webinar. Thank you, everyone, for attending the webinar, and thank you for your questions. You'll be receiving a recording of this webinar via email within the next 48 to 72 hours. Just a reminder that we are launching our very first Culture Summit unconference taking place this December, and we'll be launching tickets next week, so please stay tuned. And if you're interested in learning more about Bunch, please visit them at www.bunch.ai. Thanks, Daria. Thanks for a super informative and educational webinar, and we hope to talk to you again soon.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you so much for all the amazing questions. And if you ever have any more questions, please do reach out to me personally as well at Darja@Bunch.ai. It's Darja with a J, Darja at Bunch.ai. I really hope to hear from you and happy to address all your questions there.